When Rare started developing games that were published by Nintendo, the company would still dabble with games based on licensed properties. In 1996, the same year they released Killer Instinct 2 and Donkey Kong Country 3, Rare also developed and released the baseball video game Ken Griffey Jr.'s Winning Run for the Super Nintendo. But even before many of these games were released, the developers at Rare had been working on a video game based on a licensed property that would not only prove to be a significant game for the company, but one of the cornerstone titles in video game history. The year 1995 saw the release of the movie GoldenEye, the 17th film in the James Bond series and the first to star Pierce Brosnan as the MI6 agent James Bond. After receiving much worldwide acclaim as being a successful reboot of the James Bond franchise, Nintendo acquired the rights to make a video game tie-in for GoldenEye. They handed over the property to the Stamper Brothers and their company and the responsibility to design a new video game based on the film. At the time, Rare only had 40 employees that were spread across several existing projects, so each of the development teams was generally small. Martin Hollis, who was chosen to be the game's director, was responsible for starting up a new team that slowly grew as new people joined the company. By the end, the main team consisted of about 9 people. During development, the team would play a lot of first-person shooter games like Network Doom and Virtual Cop in order to help shape the sort of gameplay they wanted for their game. For the first few months of its development, the plan was to create a 3D first-person rail shooter for the Super Nintendo that would play similar to Virtual Cop and feature the rendered graphic style of sprites and backgrounds that Rare had done with games like Killer Instinct and Donkey Kong Country. However, when Martin Hollis was offered the chance to make the game, he refused to work on the game unless it was moved to Nintendo's next console, then known only as the Ultra 64. The development team that was working on GoldenEye was relatively inexperienced. With the exception of 2 people on the team, Martin Hollis and David Doak, none of the people working on the code, graphics, and game design had worked on a game before. To many of them, this was their first game. The team visited the studios of the GoldenEye film to collect blueprints, diagrams, and photographs of settings that were used in the film. Wireframe models for the settings were created using Nintendo's development software for the Nintendo 64 in combination with Rare's Silicon Graphics computers. The team would then add textures to the models using the photographs of the film sets. According to Martin Hollis, the majority of the time was spent building the engine, designing the art assets, and writing the enemy's artificial intelligence. GoldenEye would end up requiring more than 2.5 years of production time, and it was only during the last year of development that the team was actually able to spend time making the final game. When the development transitioned to the Nintendo 64, the plan changed to make the game into a traditional free movement first-person shooter. The game's level designs were primarily based around the GoldenEye film, but the mission structure allowed certain sequences in the film to be extended or modified so that Bond was able to participate more than he did in a particular sequence of the film. Each level created in the game was designed to be a complete and believable environment populated with numerous objectives, characters, and various obstacles. Depending on the difficulty level chosen by the player, the number of objectives would change for each level. Because of this, each level felt more realistic due to its non-linear nature. The multiple routes across a level, along with several varied objectives, were inspired by the stage and level design of Super Mario 64. The development team also added in all kinds of elements that no other games had tried before. When the player would shoot at an enemy, they would receive different levels of damage depending on the area of the body that was hit. Headshots were instantly fatal, and sniper rifles were able to zoom in on targets. Stealth elements were also introduced, accompanied with suppressed weapons, the ability to sneak past guards, and destroy security cameras. Late into the development process, the team decided to take advantage of the Nintendo 64's 4-player capabilities by adding a multiplayer mode to the game. Originally viewed as a complete afterthought, the majority of the work was done by Stephen Ellis, who, according to David Doak, was placed in a room with all the code written for the single-player game and told to turn GoldenEye into a multiplayer game. Despite the development team being largely inexperienced, they were incredibly passionate about their game and put in the time and effort to make GoldenEye as good as they could. However, with its growing development cycle that was constantly filled with delays, there were times when the project faced the risk of being cancelled by Nintendo. Fortunately, the management at Rare was very supportive of the team and didn't tell them about it, confident that Nintendo would approve of the final product. They even shielded the team during development from any pressure they might have received from Nintendo and Eon Productions, the production company behind the James Bond films. The music for the game was composed by Graham Norgate. Since he was really busy composing music for Blastcore at the time, the soundtrack for GoldenEye was also worked on by Grant Kirkhope, a newcomer at Rare who also worked on the game's sound design, and Robin Beanland, who contributed a couple music tracks. GoldenEye was originally intended to be released at the launch of the Nintendo 64, but was delayed until more than a year later. After a long development cycle and impressing Nintendo with their game, GoldenEye was released on the Nintendo 64 worldwide on August 25, 1997. GoldenEye was met with an overwhelming amount of praise from critics and worldwide acclaim among players. The game's numerous objective structure and new elements introduced to the genre helped the game stand out as a new take on first-person shooters and a breath of fresh air compared to its contemporaries at the time. Many praised it for being the definitive first-person shooter that was not available on the PC and managed to present a control scheme on consoles that played very well. GoldenEye was not only viewed as a revelation in the game industry, but also a revolution in game design. Another important factor that led to GoldenEye's success was the multiplayer mode. This mode, which became incredibly addictive among players, had an incredible wealth of customization options for players to enjoy. There were all kinds of content for players to unlock in the game. If players managed to complete a level under certain circumstances related to the difficulty level or a set time limit, they could open up a long list of features that could enhance the entire game. Many references to the entire James Bond franchise were seen throughout the game, whether it be the name of game modes in multiplayer, certain weapons in the game, or even 2 secret levels at the end of the single-player campaign. Many of the people who worked on GoldenEye were also featured in the game, such as the developers that served as playable characters in multiplayer, and the Klobb weapon, which was named after Ken Lobb, a strong advocate of the game at Nintendo during its development. Players who spent countless hours playing GoldenEye became so obsessed with finding every secret in the game that they even discovered secrets not meant to be found, like a distant island in the first level, or the multiplayer test level Citadel. With so much critical praise for the game and its growing word of mouth among players, in 1998, GoldenEye received the Games Award at the BAFTA Interactive Entertainment Awards, where Rare also received the award for Best UK Developer. At the first annual Interactive Achievement Awards, GoldenEye received 4 awards for Outstanding Achievement in Software Engineering, Console Action Game of the Year, Console Game of the Year, and Interactive Title of the Year. With the first-person shooter genre becoming more popular over the years, GoldenEye became one of the top games that many fans wanted to receive a remake or some kind of return. Of course, the process for doing something like that had become very difficult due to the issues concerning the owners of the video game rights. While Nintendo owned the rights to the GoldenEye game, Rare had become acquired by Microsoft, and the rights to the James Bond franchise was held by Electronic Arts shortly after GoldenEye was released. There were talks between each of the companies regarding how a re-release would be handled, whether it could be made available on the Nintendo Virtual Console or perhaps updated for a release on Xbox Live Arcade. By January 2008, there were reports that Rare had been working for several months on an updated port of GoldenEye for Xbox Live Arcade that would include online multiplayer. Unfortunately, about 2 months before the game could be released, it was reported that Microsoft was unable to work out a deal with Nintendo regarding the financial aspects of its distribution, which led to the game's cancellation. Shortly after this announcement, a video was released on the internet showing how far along this updated remake had come along and what it would have potentially looked like had it been released. GoldenEye remained the top-selling first-person shooter in history until the title was overtaken by Halo 3. Over the years, many of the game conventions introduced in GoldenEye have continued to evolve, such as game level design, enemy AI, multiplayer content, and the introduction of dual analog controls when it comes to first-person shooter control schemes. Factors like these, among others, have definitely proven that the standards for first-person shooters have grown far beyond what was considered revolutionary at the time for GoldenEye. However, the design and experience of GoldenEye was something that not only remained with players, but even video game developers. This was especially seen with future games that were based on the James Bond franchise. After Rare and Nintendo chose not to develop another game based on the James Bond license, the rights to the franchise were acquired by Electronic Arts in 1999. They first released a third-person shooter based on Tomorrow Never Dies, which was a commercial and critical failure. Then they released The World Is Not Enough in the year 2000, which was a first-person shooter designed in a similar vein to GoldenEye. Since the game sold better than Tomorrow Never Dies, the tradition of developing a James Bond game as a first-person shooter continued with EA's original games Agent Under Fire and Nightfire. EA dabbled with having a James Bond game as a third-person shooter once again with Everything or Nothing. In 2004, EA released a first-person shooter named GoldenEye Rogue Agent, where players didn't take on the role of James Bond, but instead an agent named GoldenEye who ends up working for the villains of past James Bond films. Along with having nothing to do with either the film or the Nintendo 64 game, the game was not very successful commercially or critically, and is seen today as being a poor attempt at exploiting the success of Rare's original game. After EA released From Russia with Love featuring Sean Connery as James Bond, they lost the rights to the James Bond franchise to Activision in 2006. Activision was now responsible for releasing new games based on James Bond, featuring the actor Daniel Craig. They first released Quantum of Solace, which was a first-person shooter based on the film. 2010 saw the simultaneous release of two different James Bond games at the same time. One was an original game titled Bloodstone, and the other was GoldenEye, a reimagining of the original Nintendo 64 game. Looking back on the original GoldenEye on the Nintendo 64, it seems like a game that shouldn't have worked out at all. It was a console first-person shooter in a time when the genre hadn't been well established. It was designed to be a movie tie-in that was released nearly 3 years after the movie, and it was developed over a span of 2.5 years by a small team that had never released a game before at a company known for releasing bad movie video games. Everything about its production history would make it seem like it was a fiasco in the making, but this team of developers at Rare managed to create a video game that didn't just become one of the pinnacles of the company's longtime success, but set the foundation for many video games to come, whether it coexists in the same genre or not. What made GoldenEye so influential was not simply what it did first, but rather what it did better than any game before it. And despite it being only one of the many games that came from Rare, GoldenEye remains one of the essential precursors to all action games that would succeed it. Next time, in part 5 of this Rare Retrospective, Rare creates a new action-adventure game based on their own original universe. With its unique take on the platformer genre and an endearing cast of characters, it would become the new duo mascot for the company and the new face of Rare in the video game industry.